listening to the No Labels, No Limits podcast with best-selling author Sarah Box, where you get the inside scoop on the steps action takers and decision makers take to align their purpose to their principles and achieve their goals in business and life. We focus on the mantra, no labels, no limits, no excuses. And now, without further ado, please welcome your commanding coach with plenty of chutzpah and heart, Sarah Box.
Hi, this is Sarah, your host of the No Labels, No Limits podcast, where we talk with inspiring guests who have challenged their own limiting labels and beliefs to pursue and accomplish their goals at work and at home. And I've noticed that it is super easy to blow past a milestone thinking that we need to keep focused on what's next. I know I'm guilty of doing that more than I'd like to admit. And thankfully, I'm surrounded by others who don't fall prey to that, but instead say, what should we do to celebrate and recognize reaching our 300th episode? So today's podcast is an answer to that question. We are going to speak with 3 different women who are consistently promoting voices in women's leadership in their own ways. We are going to talk about the sting of rejection as a leader and entrepreneur and how we can bounce back and move beyond it. What conversations and trends are taking place in professional circles about promoting the voices of women in leadership and the role of personal or professional growth and encouragement in transformation along the leadership pathway. So our 3 panelists are Stacey Turmel, a technology attorney and legal subject matter expert in website and digital accessibility compliance. Stacey has more than 25 years of regulatory compliance and commercial litigation experience. Nadine Mullings, CEO and founder of Nadine Mullings Marketing Agency and the Women Faith Plus Business Community and her own podcast of the same name, is another panelist, and Alice Draper, founder of Hustling Writers, a publicity business that makes publicity easy and accessible for underrepresented women and entrepreneurs at all stages of their business. Each of these women have a different take on bringing a voice for women through women into whatever arena they are working in. First of all, thanks for joining the podcast today. And I'd like to start by asking you to share a bit more about yourself and specifically why promoting women's voices in leadership is important to you. So why don't you go first, Alice?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here, Sarah. I'm really excited to be here with you guys. So I have a background in journalism, and I kind of naturally gravitated towards the publicity space when I started doing copywriting work with coaches and ended up pitching their stuff, and eventually that evolved into a business. And promoting women's voices in leadership, well, my story is that having publicity in the right places, which was back then writing articles for magazines like HuffPost and Refinery 29, gave me the authority to, one, be a high-level copywriter, and that ended up giving me the authority to be a publicist. And along the way, I kind of realized that these skills are not necessarily packaged as easy, especially in the entrepreneurship space. So like pivoting from journalism to publicity, I realized that a lot of my clients had these ideas that they had to have 100,000 followers, or they had to have had been in business for 5 years, or just some random obscure metrics they had to have met in order to be worthy of pitching themselves, or in order to garner acceptances. And the reality is that you just need a good story. And I've kind of realized that this is the biggest barrier. It's not the stories, it's just the confidence, and it's the grit of kind of getting through those rejections, because the rejections will come. That's part and parcel of the process. And most media is dominated by men. Like, just editors of magazines are pretty much, I think it's like 80-something% men. The books, if you talk to a man, it's probably more likely that he has, I know my partner has mostly read books by men, whereas as women, we read books by both genders most of the time. So I just think that, the more we kind of get women's voices out there, the more we can kind of diversify the messages we're constantly consuming, and that inform the way we think and the way we work.
Thank you. And Stacey, what about you?
Well, Sarah, first of all, I want to say thank you so much for having me here today. I really appreciate this opportunity. You and I have had the opportunity to talk in the past, and I just love your approach to these things. And I think it's just incredibly important. So I appreciate you giving me a stage, if you will, to have this discussion and share, especially with the amazing people that you have here today. My name is Stacey Turmel. I have been an attorney for almost 30 years. It's hard to actually think about that because I remember working for an attorney who had been practicing for 30 years and thinking about how old he must be. So now I'm there, I'm just kind of like, wow. I'm kind of like reframing my perspective on a lot of different things that I thought when I was in my 20s. But anyways, I have, to kind of follow on with what Alice said, I guess I would say that I have tried to create my life to be an interesting story. And one of the reasons why is because when it comes to women and the things that women can do, see, be, try, is that I heard a quote one time, which is, you can't be what you can't see. And so I think it's incredibly important and empowering for women of all, places, ages, experiences, cultures, background, race, to know what is possible. And so I'm going to get out there and try to do as many different things as I can. I've been in private practice as a lawyer. I've been in front of judges and been called little lady, back in the day. I've had several businesses, some of which have done well, some of which have not done well. I've been working in leadership roles in higher education, and I've done litigation in commercial areas along with intellectual property. And currently, I am trying my hand at being an in-house counsel for a Fortune 50 super company. Citibank, which is really cool and scaring the living crap out of me because it's totally different than anything I've ever done before. So, I'm trying these things because I want to, it's important to me to have the experiences to be able to share those with other people who might be interested, in order to give them some perspective. And so that's why I think that this particular topic is so incredibly important.
Thank you, Stacey. That's interesting that you say that, because I think about when you say you're trying these different things, you're also showing people what's possible in addition to showing yourself that, and then flipping over to you, Alice, which you had commented to me previously about you setting your life up to be location independent while you're doing all of this and helping people have voice, both which show people it's possible. What has been considered the norm doesn't need to be that way, period. It can look a lot of different ways. And Stacey, keep trying on different things. When people say, are you going to quit? And I'm going, why would I do that? Quit what? Like, what am I going to quit? So Nadine, I want to ask you to speak a little bit more specifically about women's voices in leadership. But could you share a little bit about the group that you really focus on helping them raise their voice and get it out, and why you do that?
Yeah, definitely. So I love this subject because I think there's power in our voice, right? We're all given these messages to share. And the group that I work with are women of faith in business who are using their public platforms to glorify God in the workplace. So their voices are just as important, and their message that they have is important to share the fact that you don't have to separate your faith and your business. You can actually combine it, which is something unique, especially if people are coming from the corporate background. A lot of times they advise you not to necessarily talk about your faith and your business. So their voices are so important because it's a unique message, allowing people to have the freedom to talk about their faith and their business and why it's important to combine the two. So I just love the fact that, these are powerful voices and powerful messages that need to be said in the marketplace that these women have.
Are most of the women their own business owners now, or do they still work within a more formal business structure, corporate or family-owned business?
Most of the women own their own business. Some may have a part-time position, but a lot of them are full-time business owners and entrepreneurs. And their message is a faith-based type of message. So it kind of connects with the type of work that they're doing.
And following up on that question, is the reason they're their quote unquote own bosses because there wasn't a space for their voice, or just because they didn't feel comfortable? I'm trying to look for some trends or some thinking about how these particular groups show up.
Yeah, definitely. What I've found through interviews on my podcast, it's usually two paths. People that never thought in a million years that they would be entrepreneurs or business owners, and it wasn't really their dream, but they were given this vision and they decided to move forward on this path of entrepreneurship and business ownership. And then there's the other group of people where that's always been their vision and it's always been their dream to be entrepreneurs and business owners. So I find they usually fall in those two buckets. And it depends on, their particular path as to how they end up being an entrepreneur and business owner.
So I'm curious what either or both of you have been seeing in trends. We've gone through COVID, or going through, I don't know, it feels to me like the never ending story because it evolves. But more importantly, we've gone through that space in our world now, our collective experience of things being shut down, us being separated from one another and then coming back, different countries in different ways. But I'm wondering during that time, or even before that time, if you have noticed changes in how people approach or think about women, specifically in leadership, how either others do that, so in the corporate setting or whatever, or if you're noticing that with the women you speak with and in your professional circles, if they're taking a different tack, I guess, on their own approach to leadership and their voice in that. So jump right in, either one of you. I don't want to put you on the spot if you don't have a thought about it right off.
Well, I'll jump in.
Good.
I think that what COVID showed us is that you don't have to be chained to a desk in order to be productive, and that there's all different types of work environments. And I think what has resulted from that particular experience is that we are now entering what I believe to a certain extent is a global employment environment. And so there are certain companies and organizations that are going to source their talent from wherever they can find the best talent. And they've seen some super high performers. And I think women have demonstrated their ability to manage and just kind of jump in and take the lead. If it's with a baby on their hip while on a Zoom call, or, like pushing a stroller while out on a walk, or whatever it might be, or just, caregiving for aging parents, and just being able to multitask as women have always, been able to do. And so those organizations that are sourcing their talent globally are able to capitalize on top performers. And then other organizations that might, have previously been geographically limited in their ability to seek talent are now embracing the hybrid work role or remote work role to a certain extent, and being able to spread their wings, if you will, to capitalize on better talent. And I think that, women have an opportunity here to really take advantage of those, those particular opportunities to show up and be like, yeah, look at me, and I'm here. And if you want to work with me, great, because guess what? There's a whole world out there that I can work with. So, catch me while you can.
And Alice, any take on that for you?
Yeah, I love everything Stacey said. And I think to add to it, I don't know how flawed my data is, because I started working with women leaders in the publicity space kind of in the midst of the pandemic. That's kind of when it was happening. And as we were sort of pushed into this online world, everything started changing. And I think in leadership, we've seen some drastic trends, like women dropping out of the workforce in bigger numbers than ever before. And that was, I think, a lot of things: burnout, cost of childcare, or having to homeschool their kids during the pandemic. And now that women are kind of stepping back into the workforce, I think women are demanding more than they have before, because there was, the Great Resignation last year, where companies really were struggling to kind of rehire people. And I think that there was more leverage. And I think that a lot of what women leaders kind of realized that the structure hasn't been working for them. This is a structure that has been built for men by men, and having a lactation room in an office. And I haven't been in the structure. I'm piggybacking off the stuff my clients say, but that wasn't enough. And so I think that we're seeing more and more women start their own businesses than ever before. We're seeing women leaders kind of pivot their businesses and their work in ways that demand more visibility than before. And I mean, you just have to scroll through LinkedIn or search an Apple Podcasts to see this. And so I think it's a really exciting time, because I think that more women want to be visible than ever before, and that we're not getting pigeonholed into the roles that society has told us we have to be in. And with that kind of push online, I think a lot of us kind of went and connected and networked with more people than we had before. At least I did. I was meeting so many people from all over the globe constantly online especially in the midst of 2020. So I think that has opened up a world of opportunities. So I think that the pandemic has made it an exciting time for women and visibility.
What trends have you seen over the last 5 years in the conversations women that you mostly support and help are having in terms of their own leadership, raising their voices and sharing their voices?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest trends is to authentically show up as yourself. A lot of times we've been conditioned to show up in a certain way, especially if you come from a corporate background. I personally come from a corporate background. I worked in a financial institution for 15 years. So when I started my own business, I kind of came to my own business with that same mindset. For the first 5 years of my business, I never talked about my faith on my business platform, because I thought that was a no-no and it wasn't the thing to do. And then I came to the realization, wait a second, this is my business. I actually can talk about whatever I want to talk about, including my faith. So I think that a lot of times that's how people come to the realization, or my clients come to the realization of like, this is my platform and I can use this platform to glorify God if that's what I'm called to do in this season of my business. So hopefully I answered your question, but that's what came to mind when I was thinking about my clients and their voices.
You did answer my question. Thank you. So that's interesting. We're talking about raising women's voices. And there were a couple of things you said in particular just now, Alice. So, women have more choice. And I'm seeing that as well. And even people who are super dedicated to their work, they're no longer willing to choose, do I have to be run down all the time? Right. There are better ways for my overall health and well-being. And for that of the people I love, I'm working to not just to deplete myself. So I'm curious, if that's the case and there's more opportunities, then is there a need for raising women's voices in leadership? I mean, it sounds like there's still a pretty big gap, right? And we're on the cusp of this, but I'm curious about that assumption that it needs to be raised. I'm testing the assumption.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you still did the math today, as far as, I mean, my company has a female CEO. I believe she's the only female CEO for banks. There's a lot of banks out there. And she's incredibly underpaid, considering the comparison across the gamut of CEOs. So I think if you were to do the math, there is still a lot of catch up to be done. And we need to continue to ring the bell until the catch up is complete. We got a long way to go.
So even with the increased voice and visibility in many places, do you still feel, or do you feel women are reluctant to claim their equal value? Are they underpricing themselves is another way of asking that question. Do they go, I can do it like for this much, and because you've got this experience, you're thinking, that's not what the marketplace shows?
I think that it comes down to women undervaluing themselves because of kind of what society, it's like a both and, like organizations capitalize on the fact that, and it's not just women, if we're looking at it from an intersectional lens, Black women would be kind of even further pushed down. But if you are, which has been outlawed in many states, but if you are asking employees to kind of disclose what they were earning in a previous job, you're just reinforcing that. And because if they were underpaid in their previous job, they're going to be underpaid in this job. And perhaps discussions about money, salaries, negotiating hasn't been as normalized for women as it has for men. You haven't seen it modeled. And I think that's a big thing. But on the point of, do women's voices still need to be raised in leadership, even though they're more visible than ever before? As like Stacey said, the numbers or the stats kind of will show you that, yes, I think mainstream media is still dominated by men. And a lot of the content that is being produced by women is almost perceived as for women. Like, this is just your little side hobby that is being produced for other women to read or to listen to or to engage with. There's this perception that a lot of women-run businesses are like lifestyle businesses that are only to cater to other women. And so I think that the more we can get comfortable with making mistakes, failure, rejection, of course, there's a lot of systemic changes that need to happen if we're looking at like big stuff like the news, but that kind of allow us to inform the way ideas are created, the way knowledge is created, the way the world is perceived, to speak in very generic terms. But yes, I think there's a lot of room for women to still have their voices amplified in the leadership space.
I thought I was on track, okay. But, I have been wrong or made assumptions that aren't quite that anymore. So I do appreciate you responding, both of you, to that kind of question in there. But, I'm thinking about, and I was asked, this has been some time ago, if I would take a cut in pay because like our business had shifted. And I thought, no, I'm not going to work any less hard. Yes, the economy's tanking. I'm not in charge of the economy. And no, I won't. And I remember feeling sick to my stomach when I said that, because I thought about it in my head first. I thought, okay, this means you might be leaving. But it also told me something else. It's like, wait a minute, if we're not doing an across the board leadership shared cut, no, I'm not in. And ultimately, I did leave that company. It wasn't for that particular reason, but I realized at that point I'd gotten comfortable, and that conversation around value and worth, I thought, who's going to stand up for you if you don't stand up for yourself, right? But that has consequences.
Yeah, I think that women in those situations, just like, you indicated you had that sick feeling in your stomach. I think because women, when they approach negotiations like that, they have a more holistic perspective on how everything relates and is going to spring off of that, what it could mean, and they consider everything, not just the negotiation. Yeah. Where, I think sometimes, well, not sometimes, but most of the time, men, this is just a transaction. And this is all, we're not taking it personally. This is just a transaction. And you're going to pay me everything I want you to pay me. And there's no second thought about how it may or may not impact, anybody else around it. It's just, this is just a transaction. And so I think that sometimes is something that is difficult for women to do. And then I also think that just from a cultural perspective, Sarah, is that the whole world needs to catch up to the fact that women need to be paid equally. And so we're having to move the needle, not only with the one who's making the ask, but also the audience who's going to be responding. And so, that's a big shift. That's not going to happen overnight, but it needs to keep moving.
So, Stacey, in your experience, when you've encountered either your other professionals, maybe it's been in casual conversations, I can't believe that situation is a unique situation. What do you say, or what might you say to someone who says, oh, I'm going to have this conversation and I hate it because of all the things you said? It's like this will have ripple effects beyond this transaction.
Well, I remember shortly before I was contacted about the role that I'm in now, I was talking to another organization. And so they had made an offer to me, and I responded with my counter offer. And then they turned around and withdrew their offer. And I was kind of like, did that just really happen? And I was just kind of sitting there stunned, like, so you wanted a lawyer who doesn't negotiate. That's what the perspective. I mean, initially I was just in shock, and I was just kind of like, oh my gosh, did I miss something? Because we always turn inward and go, what did I do? Right. And it's like, that's something that needs to stop. And so, immediately I was just like, I just sat there, and then I thought to myself, they wanted a lawyer who doesn't negotiate. This is not a good fit. This worked out for the best, but I mean, I wouldn't tell, I'd be lying if I said there was like a good 15 to 30 minutes where I was just like, what the heck just happened? I think if we're talking about like making that ask, you're coming to the table as far as like what what you bring to, and the value that you bring to that particular institution, organization, or company. It's not about, well, I need. It's about, this is what, I have done, and quantify it to a certain extent, and then make the ask, so that's factually based, not emotionally based. And sometimes that's hard, but it certainly, continues to allow you to use those facts to bolster future asks, and it becomes a practice that you can engage in on a regular basis.
Well, and for you to be able to pause and say, wait a minute, what else does this tell me? Beyond the fact that my offer was rejected and then withdrawn, the original, what else is that telling me?
Right.
And I
dodged a bullet. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I just had a conversation with a gal who, as a favor, this woman is like nationally known. As a favor to a colleague, she went to present to this board. And afterward, the board chair came and said, I think you need to really speak at a much lower educational level. And she said, Sarah, I already dropped it a level. And she goes, I went home and kept thinking, I'd prepared for this, and I kept thinking about it. And what did I do? Like, what could I have done different? And I said, can I give you a different perspective? I said, that was incredibly rude for someone that you drove to do to even give you feedback in that nature. It should have been, thank you. Would they have said that to someone else? And she goes, I don't think so. And I said, exactly. I said, that was rude behavior. I said, stop worrying about them. But it was that thing like, oh my gosh, it was. And I said, I wouldn't go back. And she goes, oh no, I already made that clear to my colleague who asked. She said, I don't think I'm your people. But it's that knee-jerk response. Alice, listening to that and thinking about the women you work with who are mostly entrepreneurs, and you're specifically working with them in marketing, where it can be tough to want to put yourself out there and say, here's why I fit for you, right? That thing Stacey was just talking about, the value and stuff. When you first start having those conversations, where are women in their headspace about that?
I would say it depends on how far they are in business, because if you've been in business for 5+ years, you've built some resilience to rejection, and you know this is part and parcel of the journey. They have been being rejected every time they come up with a new offering or a new launch, and they're reaching out to partners and whatever. So when I say, you know, it's unpredictable, there'll be rejections, it's like, well, duh, that's anything in entrepreneurship. And what I have noticed, because I have worked with some entrepreneurs who are like in their first year of business, is that the biggest barrier, especially if it's like if I'm doing like a once-off package, but they're the ones that are going and sending out the pitches and they're following up, and I just sort of have check-ins with them occasionally, is that this action of sending out pitches, action of following up is really tough. And it's it would be far easier for them if they could just offload this to someone else. And that's because every time you're sending that pitch, you're imagining the other person's response. And I think that like when we look at it from a kind of objective level, on the receiving end of getting a pitch, you're like, either don't have time to open this, you don't even see it, or you do see it and you think, oh, I'll get back to that later. Or you think like, oh, damn, my roster's full, I can't take on any more guests. Or you think like, not the most interesting pitch in the world. But like, you're rarely going to look at it and think, wow, how dare they, the audacity, unless it's like a very like rude, demanding pitch. But I mean, the way they're reaching out is not in that way. So yeah, I think that that's kind of that there is a strong fear of getting rejected, especially in the beginning when it comes to publicity. I know that the fear of rejection kind of sifts through at all stages of business, and it's something we're always working on. I'm working on it now with my new offering. But yeah, I think that like in the beginning stages of business, it's definitely the toughest, at least from what I've observed.
So what tips do you give folks that you're working with? Because clearly you want them to be successful. How do you help? What is a practical thing? I'm imagining someone's listening going, ooh, I think she just described me. What tip would you give them?
Here's a practical thing that worked really well for me when I was a freelance journalist, pitching to very jaded editors, is I set rejection goals, and that's not my idea. I am a part of a network of Facebook groups, and one of them was a Facebook group centered around rejections. And I discovered all of these journalists with like decades more experience than me who are writing for magazines like the New York Times and the New Yorker and CNN. And they would put posts up there being like, oh my gosh, I am so excited, I just got rejected from the Paris Review or wherever. And then everyone would comment and be like, amazing, like I can't believe the editor actually responded and rejected you. You definitely should pitch them again. And the premise of what kind of this group was centered around was an article, and I think it's LitHub, and it was about why you should set a goal for 100 rejections a year. So I went out and did that. I made my spreadsheets, and this was as a writer, and I put my things and I logged each rejection. I think I got to like 58 rejections that year and a bunch of acceptances. So I think that kind of is a way of reverse engineering the process that let me stop focusing on why am I not getting accepted, or like imagining the execution of the story and the people I was going to talk to, and then like losing all my momentum and excitement when that rejection came in. I stopped forgetting about places I'd pitched. So when an acceptance came in, I was like, oh, forgot about that. So yeah, that's an actionable thing, I would say. And the other thing is, I think, finding a community. So you will find entrepreneurs who are in a similar position to you, and maybe they're trying to land more speaking engagements. Maybe they're trying to network with new people. But I think that if you can find other people who are in a similar position and if you have like maybe a monthly call or chat group somewhere or something, it's just really encouraging to know that you're not the only one going through this. This is a very normal process. Rejections are normal. Rejections are a sign of taking action. So there, I think those are the two tips. Is one, set rejection goals, work for me, and two, find a community.
I actually had a friend who used to work for a large company, and same thing. She said, oh my God, I was supposed to get a certain amount of productivity, I guess. And she felt terrible because she would get these rejections. And her supervisor said, you're not going to get a yes till you've gotten 5 solid rejections. So I don't care how many rejections you get. Go out and get them, you know. Alice talked about rejection. Stacey talked about rejection. Would you share a little bit about rejection and how that shows up for an entrepreneur, business owner?
Yeah, definitely. I think rejection is huge. It's a part of the journey and part of the process, but nobody likes it, right? It's what we have to deal with and what we have to encounter it, but nobody generally wakes up and says, I can't wait to be rejected today. I'm so excited for rejection. It kind of hurts. It stings, right? So in the journey, you have to learn that, you focus on the action that you need to take in your business and not the outcome. When we focus on the outcome, then we're more hurt by the rejection. But if you say, okay, I have 5 sales calls to make today, and your focus is on doing the 5 sales calls, but not the outcome of the 5 sales calls, then you continue forward in momentum. So I think the focus in how you deal with rejection, the focus is really not focusing on the outcome of the result of the work that you're doing, but being in action. Because as they say, if you keep getting no's, eventually you're going to get a yes, right? So continue being in action and you will get that yes. And don't focus on the outcome of all the no's that you received before you got the yes. So I would say that is the key thing. And the second key thing when it comes to rejection is learning that there's a lesson in it too, right? So if you are being rejected, did you not explain it properly? Were there some things that you could have improved on? So kind of reflecting on each rejection too, so you can make that a lesson on how you improve for the next, sales conversation or the next encounter. So really looking at rejection as kind of redirection on how you can be better, So it's really about those lessons and not focusing on the outcomes.
So another tool in our toolbox of business success.
Definitely.
Yep.
I agree.
Yeah. Well, if you don't show up and play, you don't stand any chance of success. You've got to at least get in the sandbox, as we like to say over at Sarah Box. So Nadine, one example from your own life of where you've had to do that.
I would say I'm still struggling with that, to be honest. I sometimes don't even like to get into sales conversations because I feel like, rejection might happen, right? So the same advice that I just gave is the advice I give myself on a daily basis. It's you need to be in action. So you have to have these conversations and learn from these conversations and not be so focused on the outcome. So the same thing that I just shared is something that I do on a daily basis. It's like, okay, if you have 5 sales conversations that you need to have today, put a check mark at the end of the day that you had 5 sales conversations. That's awesome and amazing that you were in action. It's not about whether that was converted to business, because then if you focus on just the outcome, you can start to feel dejected. You not only rejected, you start to feel less confident. So you just really have to move forward in action and be confident in the fact that your action will result in something good in the end, even if it's after 100 conversations, right?
I think that's very wise, and especially the part about learning something from the conversations.
Yeah, definitely. There's always something to learn. And, it's about practicing too. Sometimes you need to practice and you're like, oh, I really said that the wrong way. On the next call, I'm going to change this. So you're practicing as you get all these rejections so then you can get better and better at it.
Practice, practice, practice. Thank you for that. So let's talk about, from your experience and how you help women, what are some of the limits or barriers women particularly face when it comes to sharing their voice?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest limits or barriers is confidence. I find that a lot of times women are not as confident as their male counterpart when it comes to sharing their voice. A lot of times we've been taught to be submissive or not be loud, especially different cultures. So because you grow up in a society that tells you as a woman not to be so aggressive or not to be so loud or to be submissive or be a lady, we have all those thoughts in our mind that we're not as confident to show up with our voice powerfully in the marketplace. So I think that can limit us to how we show up and how we use our voice, or even how visible that we tend to be. That confidence level, I feel, I see in myself and sometimes in my clients, as being a woman, that you can really struggle with that when it comes to sharing your voice.
So this is an interesting thing that I've observed. Sometimes people go from, okay, I'm going to be confident, right? But the pendulum swings over. They're overcompensating, right? So they're basically just being loud, right? They're not that confident. So they're overcompensating instead of saying, this is what I need and expect, or whatever the conversation is. So do you notice that, like, is that a natural thing where we kind of have the pendulum has to go that way before we find our own balance, or why is that?
I haven't found that the overly confident and loud woman is out there as much as the one that's afraid to share her voice and afraid to be visible. So I wouldn't say that the pendulum may swing in the opposite direction, but I'll say 90% is in the direction of she's not confidently sharing her voice. There may be 10% and she's loud and it's too much. But I think more people that I know are struggling with not sharing, not being confident, and being in that space. And, shifting slightly to the left or slightly to the right to start getting the confidence enough to be visible, but never all the way to the left or right where they're now loud and obnoxious and too confident. So I would say no, 90% is in that level of not confident enough. And if they do move, it's not all the way to being too confident and being loud and obnoxious. No.
Usually the loud and obnoxious from a dead stop is supported by a lot of alcohol. It's like all inhibitions are gone. So now I'm just
well, hopefully not in a corporate or business environment. That wouldn't be the case.
No, thoughtful communication and being clear about who you are and your voice is really the goal there. So when you talk about the corporate environment and people maybe not feeling comfortable, I'm wondering in what other areas, all of you, this is a question for all of you, you see women dimming or keeping their voices less forthright or powerful for whether it's faith or another topic, like they're just not as comfortable being out front on it. Or is there any particular area any of you have seen or talked to other folks about that you're seeing that reluctance necessarily?
I'd say what I've noticed amongst my clients is, and it's the big advice that you get in business, so one of the ones that's hardest to do is to niche down. But when we're talking about niching down, it's actually talking to the problems they're most dedicated towards, that they're scared of speaking directly to. So one example is a leadership coach who has male clients as well, but most of the clients that she has are women, and the ones that she loves working with are women, but she's scared of directing her messaging to like the problems women face at work, like the gender pay gap, all the things that she's most interested in, because, it's going to make this group of people, the men, feel excluded, and like maybe I won't get this business. And this client ended up pivoting towards women's leadership, and her business grew like fivefold within a year. So I always think it's that like scary leap. And another example is a client who speaks about workplace bullying. And specifically, like the thing she wants to talk about is the racism that causes workplace bullying, but she's too scared to talk about that because she doesn't want to exclude her white clients or like make white people feel like uncomfortable about her messaging. And I think also like she's kind of gearing more towards that, and it's just landing so much better. Her publicity is so much better. She's being invited to more events and stuff, because when you're speaking to the thing you want to be speaking to, I guess it really speaks to the problem you're passionate about solving, and you're not kind of watering down your messaging or diluting it to sort of cater everyone, which ends up catering no one often. So yeah, I think that's what I'd say.
And Stacey, you've got a pulse on this in the corporate world, because you see a lot of, well, you're in the corporate world and have been. So you see a number of different places that this may occur. Can you share any about that?
Absolutely. Well, leaders set cultures. So whether that's in an organization or that's you as a leader, what is the culture that you want to set? Or what is the culture that you want to be a part of? Organizational culture is something that is free to create and can, save a company millions, billions of dollars by providing a place that is not dictated by money to a certain extent. I'm just right now just referring to culture. So when an organization establishes a culture that encourages productive and respectful debate on subjects that can be considered dicey or touchy or things like that, and they do it in such a way that it's encouraged in a positive manner and not just let to run amok, then those are structured methodologies that can be implemented and can actually result in successful outcomes. In addition, when you show up small in the world, you're serving nobody. I mean, at the end of the day, if you have a voice and you want to speak about something, certainly take the pulse of what's going on around you and see if you can figure out a way to start moving the needle. Sometimes we have to meet people where they're at, and they might not necessarily be, where we want them to be. Sometimes we have to move 90% to get them to do 10, and then continuing to move that forward. So I think that it's incredibly important, but it is possible. And it's something that I'm experiencing, right now, which I think is wonderful. It's not always going to be perfect, but it's just important to define, how it can be done, because I think that that's what's really going to, move an organization forward and empower those groups so that they do feel heard.
So how do you do that without, I understand what you're saying is necessary, but how do you do that so it doesn't become just a token activity? Like, we did this group and people talk about this and check that box. Now you've been heard. I'm trying to think about how you get people to own it. And that might be part of the 90-10 that you were talking about, but to where people are curious and want to know.
Well, I think that it's to encourage positive experiences and to not want to come out of the gate solving all the problems, because I think that that's incredibly unrealistic. And that also, could lend itself to performative, discussions, which is basically we're just here blowing hot air and nothing's ever being done. So, and that's just like an epic waste of time. So I think that what people want to see is just, start off small so that it's something that's manageable. So if you're a leader of an organization, do the research, do the due diligence on what you can do to, open these types of discussions up in a safe and productive and respectful manner. Start with some small things and move forward and see that there's action steps and things are being done that can continue to be built on. Another thing is that when you're able to do that and build on those small action items and keep going, you get to engage the power of momentum, which is when people start to loosen up and actually start to move on the transformation with you, which is incredibly powerful. So it's just trying to figure out what that balance is and continuing to check in with your different stakeholders to ensure that, people aren't just like nodding their heads and they're really not on board at all, so it's doing that active listening, so this is what I'm saying. What did you hear? Because that's not always what I said is what they heard, or making that assumption. And I've learned that the hard way,
Oh, my.
I mean, it's just like, I'm like, were we even in the same room together? I mean, like what happened here? So I think that's, but people hear things differently, and it's, they're filtering it through their own personal mechanism. So, I know that there's resources out there that can be utilized. And so I would encourage anyone who's interested in doing that to find those resources and find the expertise and the professionals. And that's why they are experts and professionals, because that's what they do. So, and it also depersonalizes it if you're worried about maybe you don't have the expertise to start doing that. It gives you an opportunity to try something out and in a safe space.
Yeah, and kind of grow your muscles a little bit with some training wheels. That's the beauty of having someone to walk alongside and help you. So both Nadine and Alice, for different reasons, focus on action as well. And Nadine, I want to come to you first, and then Alice, I'll give you a little space to think about this. But Nadine, when we think about the culture, I know that when you're working with folks either on the marketing end and now in your new adventure, which isn't public quite yet, you start with that. You start with the values and all of that. So why do you do that?
Well, I start with that because I believe it's the foundation of success. The key things that I really help my clients with is, number one, purpose. What is the purpose of your business? Starting with the why. I think it's Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why, that has been such a powerful TEDx talk. That people actually buy from companies when they understand the why. It's not really about the product or the service, it's the why. So defining your purpose and having a purpose statement as a business is so important. It's foundational, I feel. The second thing that's foundational is your mission. Your mission and your purpose can be different. So it's slightly different. And having an upfront mission statement, whether that's on your website or on your social media, so people can understand your mission and want to join hands with you in that mission is so important. So your purpose, your mission, also who you're called to serve. A lot of times you're called to serve a specific group of individuals. I think Alice mentioned earlier about niching, right? So if you're called to serve a specific group of people, making sure that in your marketing messaging, you're calling out those people. So really, truly understanding who you're called to serve in the marketplace is important. And then the fourth thing that I find is foundational and needed and necessary is vision, right? What is that forecast 5-10 years down the road? What's the kind of difference that you want your business to make in the world? What is that big picture vision? So I consider all of those things, and also values, as you mentioned, Sarah, to be foundational. If you don't know your purpose, your mission, have a vision statement, know who you're called to serve in the marketplace, and understand your core values, your marketing effort is not going to be as fruitful or successful. So I always start off with those foundational pieces.
So what made me ask that question of you in particular, Nadine, is I'm curious, when we don't start there, or if it's at that beginning place or even a review place, when you're coming back and going, okay, where are we at? And thinking about what Stacey just said about having these conversations, if you don't have an intrinsic value, not the forward facing to make people looking at your website think, oh, aren't they cool? They're saying all the right stuff. But an intrinsic value to want to have shared voices or shared leadership or whatever, right? If that's not there, is it possible to create it without it being just a surface, so the topping doesn't just slide off?
Yeah, I think it is there even if you don't articulate it, right? It's almost like your reputation. It's like when you walk in the room, people, when you leave the room, you have a reputation, what people say about you. So you're kind of showcasing your values and your mission in a way without necessarily stating it. People kind of get a vibe or a feel of what it is. But when you're crystal clear and you're showing up and articulating it, that's when people can connect with you even better. And that's why I say that's what makes you most successful marketing wise. People can actually clearly understand your mission, clearly understand your vision, not just get a vibe of what you do or what your values are, but they know it. That's when they're going to be the most loyal clients. That's when they're going to be most loyal to your brand, when they're connected to that mission and vision and the purpose of your business. But I think even if you didn't write it down, you kind of already have a vibe in the marketplace where people are kind of assuming what your values are and assuming what your mission is. But the better you are able to crystally articulate it and clearly say it, then you'll attract people more that way.
So, Alice, this is why I left you for last, because you, in your mission statement, publicly say that your mission is to make publicity easy and accessible for underrepresented women entrepreneurs at any stage or all stages of their business, right? So that seems extremely intentional. Did you start with that? And how do you use that to make sure that you're bringing women's voices up and in leadership in their own businesses or in the community? How does your mission drive you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So on Nadine's point, which is like I 100% agree with everything you just said, and I think that those are the foundational building blocks of a successful business. And like you said, the branding, the content we put out lets people assume this is your values. So if you're sharing like a lot of, I don't know, feminist posts, they're going to assume you're a feminist, and if they're a feminist, maybe they'll connect with you. But if you can't describe what your mission is and what you're doing in a way that a 5-year-old can't understand, then maybe it needs to be simplified a little bit more. So onto my mission. I didn't have it articulated that well in the beginning of my business. I of course knew, I loved working with women entrepreneurs. I loved working in the personal development space. And so I kind of went into this coaching space first as a copywriter and then as a publicist. But on the side, I was also growing an Instagram platform where I was talking to South African freelancers. I'm South African, and I studied in journalism school, and I chose to kind of build out my career online because I thought there was a lot more potential there, and the job market in South Africa is not great. So I kind of had this drive to share a lot of the resources and knowledge that I was getting with other freelancers. And a lot of that was publicity, it was pitching, how to pitch yourself. Like, you can pitch yourself anywhere. Like, these are the pitches that I use to get into Refinery 29 or the Huffington Post or whatever. And so when I kind of got down to clarifying my message for my business, I realized like, there are like these two components, and I think they were completely unrelated. I thought, like, I hosted twice with a fellow South African entrepreneur, hosted writing workshops, and we kind of had that mission separately to kind of help people amplify their publicity, get themselves published, build their brands so that they can make money off of this. And then my work with coaches. And when I sat down to write this mission, I was like, actually, the two can very much come together. And while my retainer clients are at a higher stage of their business, I will be having other resources, trainings to teach people to do this themselves, free resources that really include people at all stages of their business, because I don't think it's reserved to people who can pay the company to do this for them every week. I think that all of us can learn how to pitch ourselves and get published. So yeah, it kind of just evolved.
We can all have a bigger voice in how we show up and represent ourselves is what I'm taking away from that, Alice. Stacey, I'm thinking about you in particular at this. You are kind of a double whammy. First of all, you are first of all, you're a lawyer. Puts people a little bit back on their heels. They're going, oh man, I got to watch out for her. She's smart, right? Assumptions. It's all assumptions. And I will say, from talking to Stacey before and interviewing before, she is really smart. She's really nice. So that's one thing. But you're also a woman, and you also are not shy about sharing what you think. In your opinion, I mean, you're tactful, and you can choose not to be, should you not want to be, I know. But what I'm curious about is if you have come to places where just that perception about your power, quote unquote power, and a stand along side by side colleague who isn't you, a male, let's say, if there has been pushback because you are uniquely you. And I'm not sure I'm asking that clearly, but I'm thinking about in what situations has your voice in the past, has someone tried to silence your voice, and how, or make it less important, and how?
Oh, I mean, I totally understand exactly what you're asking. And to answer your question, yes. And it's happened for a host of different reasons. It happened when I was as a younger attorney, because my attitude was, I'm a lawyer, you need to listen to me, I'm in charge, and I didn't know any better. And so I just wanted to be the loudest, strongest voice in the room. And I was going to, in any situation, just go down swinging. I mean, whatever I needed to do. And then when I had the opportunity to work in higher education, and I was in a professional role and dealing with faculty who are basically, lifetime employees for the most part, in their particular role, I had to learn how to lead with absolutely no authority. And that was an incredible learning experience on many different fronts. One was, for instance, just trying to get buy-in and and how to get buy-in. And so what I learned was, instead of just telling people what should be done, which, when you think about it, just in an isolated environment, when you tell somebody what to do, their initial reaction is arms crossed. I don't have to listen to you. That's like the natural human reaction.
You're not the boss of me.
Exactly. No, you didn't. I do not have to listen to you. I'm not going to do it, or I'm going to figure out a way not to do it just because you said I should. And so, I was learning that previous style, while it may have worked in a courtroom, was not really working when you're trying to lead without authority, and you're trying to basically gain buy-in. So I learned the power of asking very pointed questions and using phrases like, I'm curious about this. Could you help me understand? Using those types of questions. Or could you please, when something sounded ridiculously crazy, like, what the heck were you thinking? Instead of saying that, even though that was in my head, I would say something like, could you walk me through that, please? So I just understand what's happening. So trying to just, kind of take a step back with a calm voice and ask those difficult questions. And also who to ask those difficult questions of, because sometimes when I'm in a group that is not wanting to be led, and does not want to perform whatsoever, and thinks that they know better than me, but based on my conversations with leadership, I know that they're wrong. I had to ask leadership in front of them a very pointed, curious question, if you will, to have leadership give that answer, so that I'm not throwing that group under the bus, but letting them learn, that they are wrong, but it needed to come from somebody else. So in order to engage that buy-in. So that was a very long-winded answer. But yeah, I mean, there are times that what I've learned now, and now that I'm a senior citizen and I've been a lawyer for a really long time, that there are times and places for me to tell people what to do and be not so diplomatic. And then there are times and places, depending on what the outcome is and the particular situation, where I need to ask those powerful questions to leverage that buy-in and try to start moving to get some momentum and traction to move towards transformation for whatever the goal is that we're trying to achieve. So, but wouldn't be my first rodeo in that one, Sarah.
Just thinking about how decades you get more and more experience, some positive and some instructive.
I feel like I'm living my life backwards, honestly. You know, I mean, when I look back at just kind of like some of the things that I really wish that I would have paid attention to, and I'm just like, oh, now I see how that didn't really work out so well. You know? So.
Life's funny that way. Okay, so I want to open it up to see if any of you have questions for one another, because you're basically meeting each other for the first time. I have the privilege of knowing you individually. So knowing a little bit about each other, are you curious? Do you have a question you'd like to ask? Nadine, are you nodding there?
I know everyone always says we can tell what you're saying by your facial expressions
Don't
and your
play
movement.
poker.
I can't help myself, right? My facial expressions give it away, and my movement give it away.
Well, thank goodness.
Yeah. Well, I was definitely curious about Alice. One of the things that I'm pivoting to, I haven't publicly announced it yet, but Sarah kind of mentioned it a little bit, is working with specific groups of women of faith in business. And one of those groups is actually podcast hosts. So when I saw your profile on LinkedIn, I saw that you assist individuals with getting on podcasts, was one of the services that you offer. So I was curious as to how you see podcast interviews and being on podcasts really shifting and taking away from traditional PR, because I've heard that conversation a lot of times where, you know, like traditional media nowadays is not as effective as like being on a podcast that has a lot of followers that are niched for your audience. So I kind of just was curious as to what your thought process is in regards to podcast guesting, and that being a new, not really new, but an initiative that a lot of people are using right now for PR.
I love this question. I had a podcast guest interview, I think a week or two ago, with Leslie Seymour from Reinvent Yourself. And she used to be the editor-in-chief of, I think, Marie Claire More magazine. And she has a long history in the magazine space. And she runs her own business she's been running for the last couple of years called Coffee Club. And she said something to me that like made my kind of wheels spin in my brain, where I was telling her my story. And she said, I think podcasts are the new magazines. She's like, I talk to so many entrepreneurs now, and like, or so many women now, and like, what music do you listen to? And they're like, I don't really listen to music that much because I'm listening to podcasts. And she was like, I am subscribed to one magazine, The New Yorker, and the rest of my time I'm listening to podcasts. And I think that kind of points to, you know, the traditional media and this form of print is dying. And my background isn't just podcast publicity, it's also publication publicity. And my clients have found like, yes, maybe there's a viral story that, you know, I've had a couple of clients' essays on like HuffPost go viral. But for the most part, publication publicity is nothing more than that logo of authority on their website or on their LinkedIn or whatever. Whereas podcasting is a lead magnet, bringing in sales. They have people coming to them and saying, hey, can I work with you? I heard you on Find Your Dream Job or whatever the podcast was. So I think that in the attention economy, what I think podcast has that other media platforms don't have is the fact that you can multitask and listen. So you can drive your car and you can be listening to podcasts. You can be washing the dishes and listening to podcasts. I do admin tasks and I listen to podcasts. If I'm filling in a spreadsheet, I can listen to podcasts. And even though information is fighting for our attention constantly, we don't have to commit to it like we would with a webinar or reading a long LinkedIn post or reading someone's article. And that, and I think like the trust that you get when you're listening in on a conversation is far more intimate than other forms of marketing. And I think NPR did a study that showed that 75% of their listeners click on this, like click on to find out more about their sponsored ads, which is a crazy statistic. Like to think that like 3/4 of the audience are going and clicking into BetterHelp, whatever it is, like even if they're not purchasing, they went and found it. So yeah, I think that podcasting is an exciting space to be in. I think it's fast growing and ever evolving, but I definitely think it is the future of media, and I think we'll see more and more PR shifting from traditional PR to podcasting and whatever else is upcoming. I don't know. Maybe it'll be some sort of AI focused media soon.
Other questions, you guys? So I'm curious, within the corporate structure in particular, do you expect, are you seeing it either from your businesses, all three of you, or personal experiences, that within that structure, the corporations are also seeing podcasting as an investment? So actually an expense, a cost center within their business that's worth investing in, for them hosting their own podcast, in addition to, you know, advertising on other people's. What are you seeing in that?
I would absolutely say yes on that question. I logged on to my credit union website and it said, listen to our podcast episode. You know, I'm like, okay, so the credit union's doing podcasts now. It's like, I think a lot of industries and businesses are realizing that how powerful podcasting can be. Kind of like Alex said, it makes it more personal. You're hearing the person's voice. It's a conversation, and people trust that, you know, and especially if it's a consistent podcast, you're building a relationship as they listen to your episodes weekly or monthly. You're building up that relationship. You're building up that trust. And as we all know, people that know, like, and trust you are more likely to buy from you. So podcasts, I think, is a great vehicle to build that know, like, and trust, and to also nurture an audience of potential clients. So you're seeing it in all different types of industries. Like I said, I was quite surprised to see when I logged on my credit union website that they now have a podcast. You know, that was actually probably a year or so ago that they started it, but I thought it was quite interesting. So I think—
Who was doing the podcast, Nadine? Was it a man or a woman?
Oh, well, it was, I think, their marketing director for the credit union. So the host of it was the credit union's marketing director, who happened to be a woman. And so she had different topics each week or month, however often it came out. So I think a lot of industries are realizing how powerful that platform can be. And it's definitely shifting. And it's so easy, too. It's not a difficult thing to publish or produce as a company in any industry. So I would say, yeah, people are definitely realizing potential of it.
So this goes back to our previous discussion, though, about whose voices are out there. You know, when you're talking about how in certain industries specifically, right, you may have, people will want to listen. A guy might want to listen to a guy versus a woman expert in something. I've got an upcoming podcast guest who does financial planning. I mean, she's amazing and she's funny, if you can be funny with financial planning, but super smart, targets women, right? Because they don't have anybody who speaks about the things that worry them. And all I could think about is, are you global? Like, are you really doing this beyond your own state, which she is? So that's what drove me to wonder who was the voice of the credit union, because that's a money institution, which often gets handed off to men being the voice, right? Banking. As to your point, Stacey, in terms of leadership within a structure like that. So, well, experts, I want to ask if there's anything you want to say, final parting words that you'd like to share with our audience as they're listening to you speak about different instances of women's voices in leadership, women's voices, period, and getting out there. Final comments, and I'll go from Alice to Stacey to you, Nadine.
I think, oh, pressure's on. Just to add too quickly what Nadine was saying, I think that I've had a few conversations that definitely support that data about podcasting. So I'm just going to add on to that quickly. I had a conversation with a podcast producer recently who is doing B2B. So he is helping those big corporations start their podcasting initiatives. So yeah, I do think that we're going to see more and more of those big corporations jumping on the bandwagon. But yeah, my final thoughts are that anyone listening, if you feel like your voice is, or that women's voices should be heard, is my recommendation is to pitch yourself. That's what I help people do. So yeah, write your pitch. You don't need to have big metrics or have it all figured out. And I think that what's great about podcast guesting is you can play around. Rejections don't kill you. In fact, no one's going to remember those rejections. So yeah, just get out there and start pitching. That's my end note.
Okay, so one tip about getting your voice out and more visible. Stacey, what about you?
I would say that it's important to stop to start depersonalizing rejection. I mean, stop personalizing it is what I'm trying to say. Use your words, Stacey. So, we tend to really personalize it like it's some sort of, fatal, dying on the sword type situation. And the thing is that, it's incredibly important to understand that it's transactional. And the way that you do that is by, just like, Alice was talking about earlier, you got to do it more. You got to get rejected more, because the more you get rejected, then you stop personalizing that what you're trying to see is like some potential failure, which it's not. I mean, it's a great learning opportunity. If you want to learn how to run better, you run more. If you want to learn how to get better at, handling rejection, get rejected more, and just look at it as basically learning a skill, because nobody else is personalizing it. You can tell the difference between the two. And I think that's incredibly important in order to just kind of get out of our own way and move things forward.
Thank you. More rejection. That's what I say. Counterintuitive, but powerful. And Nadine, bring it on home.
I guess my final thoughts would be just to embrace the power of your voice. We've all been given messages, I believe, that can impact and influence and inspire other people. So embrace that. Embrace the power of your voice. Embrace the unique message that you've been given. And don't be afraid to show up and be visible on whatever platform, whether that's a blog, whether that's a podcast, whether it's your website, whether it's a social media post. Don't be afraid to speak the message that's in your heart, because it will impact, influence, and inspire someone else, and it creates a ripple effect in the marketplace. So embrace the power of your voice would be my final message.
Well, thank you, one and all. And for folks who are listening and going, yeah, how do I connect with these gals? It'll be in the show notes. We've got all the info for you. Just check on the I want to know more button. It's all going to be in there. And reach out to them. They're really fun. They're really smart. And you will learn a lot. And for those who have, Nadine and Stacey also have previous podcast episodes in our community. So we'll put those links in. Alice is a soon-to-be podcast interview. We're going to go into depth with her. So we'll have her information as well. So go back and check them out. And thank you for joining us on the No Labels, No Limits podcast.
Congratulations on your 300th episode of the podcast. That is so amazing.
You've been listening to the No Labels, No Limits podcast with best-selling author, change agent, and strategic vision coach, Sarah Box. You can grab the show notes and find out how to work with Sarah at sarahbox.com/No Labels, No Limits podcast. We'd love this podcast to reach as many people as possible. So please remember to rate, leave a 5-star review, and share the podcast with someone you think would get value from this conversation. Until next time, keep taking those daily action steps to align your purpose to your principles and achieve your goals in business and life.